The Cold War, from 1945 to 1991, split the world between the United States and the Soviet Union. Their rivalry shaped politics, economics, and culture without direct conflict. But how did allies become adversaries? Historians have debated this for decades, with no single answer. Three main schools of thought emerged: orthodox, revisionist, and post-revisionist. Orthodox historians blame Soviet expansion. Revisionists point to American policies. Post-revisionists see shared responsibility. Examining these views shows that history is interpretation, and the Cold War's origins remain a lively debate. The orthodox view, dominant in early Cold War America, blames the Soviet Union for starting the conflict. Historians argue Stalin's regime was expansionist, breaking promises at Yalta and installing communist governments across Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain was seen as proof of Soviet aggression, making the Cold War, in this view, inevitable. In the 1960s, revisionist historians argued the US wasn't just defending freedom, but expanding its economic empire. William Appleman Williams saw the Marshall Plan as a tool to secure markets for American goods. The Soviet buffer zone was seen as defensive, not aggressive. For revisionists, the Cold War was about America's drive to create a world safe for capitalism. By the 1970s, post-revisionist historians sought a more balanced view. John Lewis Gaddis and others argued the Cold War was a tragedy of misperceptions and conflicting interests. Both sides acted out of fear and insecurity in a chaotic post-war world. Stalin's brutality and paranoia mattered, but so did America's economic and security interests. Defensive moves by one side were seen as threats by the other, creating a cycle of suspicion. The collapse of the wartime alliance was almost inevitable, given the power vacuum and incompatible systems. Post-revisionists see no clear villains, just flawed leaders, trapped by ideology and circumstance. The Cold War, in this view, was a tragic clash of empires, not a simple story of good versus evil. Both Truman and Stalin were shaped by their nation's fears and ambitions. The conflict's origins, post-revisionists argue, lie in mutual misunderstanding and the structure of the post-war world. Key events like the Yalta and Potsdam Conferences are interpreted differently by each school. Orthodox historians see Yalta as Stalin's betrayal, ignoring promises of free elections in Eastern Europe. Potsdam marks Truman's tough stand against Soviet bullying. Revisionists argue Yalta's agreements were vague, and Roosevelt knew Eastern Europe would fall under Soviet influence. They see Truman's aggressive posture at Potsdam, especially after the atomic bomb test, as escalating tensions. Post-revisionists view both conferences as a series of miscommunications, with leaders misunderstanding each other's intentions. The Truman Doctrine is also debated. Orthodox historians call it a noble defense of freedom. Revisionists see it as a declaration of global ideological war. Post-revisionists argue it was both defensive and dangerously broad, setting the stage for decades of conflict. These events show how the same facts can be read in radically different ways. The Marshall Plan, Berlin blockade, and NATO's creation are also hotly debated. Orthodox historians see the Marshall Plan as generous aid to rebuild Europe and resist communism. Revisionists argue it was economic imperialism, tying Europe to American interests and isolating the Soviets. The Berlin blockade is seen by Orthodox scholars as Soviet aggression. Revisionists call it a defensive response to Western moves in Germany. NATO, for the Orthodox, was a defensive alliance against a real Soviet threat. Revisionists claim NATO was provocative, escalating the arms race and justifying US military presence in Europe. Each event is a lens for the broader debate. Was the West defending itself or expanding its power? The answer depends on which historical school you follow. These flashpoints reveal the complexity of Cold War origins. The Cold War debate evolved as new evidence emerged and global events shifted. The Vietnam War fueled revisionist critiques of US policy, while détente encouraged post-revisionist ideas of shared responsibility. The collapse of the Soviet Union opened archives, giving historians access to Soviet documents for the first time. These records showed Stalin's regime was driven by paranoia and ideology, but also revealed Soviet policy was inconsistent and reactive. The new evidence supported post-revisionist views, but also confirmed some orthodox claims about Stalin's intentions. Most historians now see the Cold War's origins as a mix of ideology, insecurity, and miscalculation on both sides. The debate continues, shaped by fresh discoveries and changing perspectives. History, it turns out, is always a work in progress. The debate over the Cold War's origins teaches us that history is a conversation, not a final verdict. Competing schools, orthodox, revisionist, post-revisionist, each offer valuable insights. The orthodox view highlights Soviet aggression. Revisionists force us to question American motives. Post-revisionists reveal the tragedy of mutual fear. No single perspective is entirely right or wrong. Understanding this complexity helps us avoid oversimplifying the past. The Cold War's origins were not a morality play, but a story of flawed leaders making tough choices in a dangerous world. Recognizing this makes us better critical thinkers and more thoughtful citizens. As new evidence emerges, our understanding evolves. The goal isn't to assign blame, but to appreciate the complexity of history. By engaging in this conversation, we gain deeper insight into both the past and the present.